Warning, the following podcast is intended for mature audiences only. Listener discretion is advised. If you are sensitive to any content or subject matter in films, I recommend looking up this film on doesthedogdie.com. It is a user-based database of extensive content warnings for pretty much every film you can think of. It basically gives you a heads up to all the potentially triggering topics a movie might have. Check it out and take care of yourself. Welcome back to We Creeps. I'm your host, Evan Exhumed. And just like before, every week I summarize and review a different horror film for people who are a little too squeamish or easily spooked to watch them, but still really enjoy the plot and often end up looking them up on Wikipedia or Googling the ending explained. We, of course, welcome horror movie fans all the same. Whether you're slim or tall or fat and small, there's a place for us all. Today is our 30th episode, so to honor the occasion, I am doing a horror film from 1932, which is titled Freaks, which was directed by Todd Browning and written by Charles MacArthur. It stars Harry Earls, Olga Baklanova, Daisy Earls, Henry Victor, Wallace Ford, Lila Himes, and Roscoe Attis, and a bunch more other people. This film is definitely a classic, and one of my friends recommended it to me, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it since I saw the end of it, and so I wanted to share that with you, because it has disturbed me, and it disturbs me that it's so damn good. The version that I will be covering is only actually 62 minutes. The original full-length version was edited and messed with by a producer for the film. He felt that it was too grotesque and was just not a good look, and he basically, against the director's wishes, cut out a bunch of content, and it used to be a 90-minute film. And the full 90-minute film did get played at the Fox Theater in San Diego for a very limited time, but there are no copies of the 90-minute version. It is completely lost. So the only people who know about it are the ones who've seen it, and they're probably all dead. And we don't have the Black Mirror technology to extract memories from corpses, so we're pretty much lost here. This film was also extremely controversial for its usage of mentally and physically disabled folks. Many of the actors who are in this film were actually disabled. They were carnival sideshow performers, such as multiple little people. We had a conjoined twin, someone who's intersex, someone who did not have hands or legs, just all sorts of different people with different disabilities were featured in this film. And during the filming, the MGM studios did not allow these performers in the studio area. They actually had to set up a separate tent for them. So one reason I just think that this film is so interesting, because it does say a lot about disability in horror and also in Hollywood at that time period. And the intent of the film was supposed to show sort of that the able-bodied individuals are more savage and crude and terrible versus the non-able-bodied people. So that was sort of the general message that the writers were trying to convey. And this is actually based on a book, or a story rather, called Spurs by Todd Robbins. So between Todd Browning and the other writers, their sort of idea with this was to make a comparison and make a statement for non-able-bodied individuals versus able-bodied individuals, and kind of show, the sort of savagery that we can see on the able-bodied side, and just the cruelty, really. So with all of that said, and that little bit of history lesson I just gave you, let's go ahead and dive right into the 1932 film Freaks. The film opens up with a man describing one of the, quote, freaks in the film, saying that this woman used to be a beautiful trapeze artist, and because she offended these other freaks, she has become this sort of monster. And so he begins to sort of tell the story of how that happens. We then move back to the past, where we see this trapeze artist named Cleopatra. As Cleopatra is doing her thing in the carnival tent, doing flips and shit, we have our little man, Hans, who is a little person, and he is checking out Cleopatra, and he is looking at her and going, damn, that is the sexiest big woman I have ever seen. Unfortunately, he is engaged to another woman who is standing literally right next to him. She is also another little person. Her name is Frida, his fiance. Throughout the film, we see little glimpses of the other performers, the other disabled folks who are in the circus. This takes place in France, but everything's in English, so whatever, doesn't really matter, I guess. But that is something that you do get to see if you are brave enough to watch this film. It's not super graphic, I would say, but yeah, it does freak me out a little bit. But anyway, so a little time has passed, I guess, or something, because now Cleopatra is sweet talking Hans. And she's like, "Oh, baby, do you think I could borrow an additional 1,000 francs? I have something random to pay off." And Hans is like, "Oh, of course, my love. Of course, I will give you the money." So we're establishing very quickly that she is or has seduced Hans, and he's a sugar daddy now, I guess. So she gets the confirmation that she's going to get that money and then goes back into her little trailer or whatever. And we get introduced to the strongman, Hercules, who is like fighting with her or something. And he's like mad at her. But I think it was actually just like a front. So that way Hans thought that they had broke up, because later we see Hercules come inside Cleopatra's trailer and start making out with her, kissing up on her, mocking her for dating Hans because he's a little person. And we can kind of get the idea that she's just really using him for his money. And Hercules is kind of cool with it because, you know, you get a lot of free stuff and they're getting money out of this. Meanwhile, Hans hasn't really broken the news to Frida. And she's like, "Hey, I just wanted to, you know, check base a little bit here. Also, stop smoking so many cigars because it's fucking up your voice a little." And Hans just goes full 1932 sexist. And he's just like, "Don't talk to me like that, woman." And Frida's like, "Excuse me, you've never spoken to me like that before in your entire life. What's going on here?" And I think we all know what's going on here. He's trying to bang Cleopatra and he's feeling bad about it and lashing out on his beloved fiance. For the next bit of the movie, we get a little glimpse into the lives of these different people, the performers. We see that the bearded lady has given birth and I guess was dating the human skeleton, who's just a man who's very thin and his bone structure is a little messed up. And for 1932, it's just a really cool glimpse into these disabled people just having normal lives like everyone else, because while they may look different or have different abilities, they are just normal people in the sense that they drink, they talk, they develop relationships, they have sex. I mean, even just today, even in 2023, it's a really cool glimpse into just sort of normalizing people with just different appearances and different needs. And what's really cool is that a lot of the performers, such as the clown or the SEAL trainer, are all able-bodied and they are having normal, friendly conversations with all of the different disabled performers. And I think, again, that's just like a very cool thing for this writer and director to show, especially in the 30s, very brave. And I was one reason why I just really love this movie. So finally, Frida approaches and confronts Hans about him dating Cleopatra behind her back. And she says to him, "You know, I understand that you want to be happy, but this woman will not bring you happiness. She doesn't take you seriously. All of the other performers see you as a person, but she sees you as like a money ticket, as someone who's just to laugh at, and everyone is laughing behind your back because you can't see it." And so Hans is a bit frustrated about that, but he does apologize to her and asks for forgiveness. Frida does forgive him, but immediately after this conversation, she goes to confront Cleopatra herself. During this confrontation, Frida reveals that Hans is the inheritor of his family's fortune, so he is loaded, which is kind of already implied, but she didn't realize that Cleopatra didn't know that, so she's like, "Oh, you must not tell anyone." And so she sort of runs off, and Frida and Hercules decide to try and kill Hans after marrying him, or after Cleopatra marries him, to get his fortune. They're going to try to murder this guy to make that money. However, I think the performers will have a little bit of a surprise for her. So some time passes, and it seems that Hans has married Cleopatra. There's a big table in the circus tent. Everybody's crunk. All the performers are there. Everybody's just having a ball of a time. Cleopatra is wasted. Hercules is there wasted. And Hans is just kind of chilling there. During all the crunking and twerking that's occurring on the table here, Cleopatra pours some poison into one of the drinks, the champagne or wine or something, for Hans to consume. Hans drinks the drink, and shortly after, Cleopatra is so fucked up that she starts just making out with Hercules right in front of her new husband. Hans is, admittedly a little bit jealous and mad. Frida is there and she sees this happen and she just storms off. And all of the other performers and stuff are, trying to show Cleopatra that she is part of the group, part of the team. And so they start saying, one of us, one of us. And that's actually, if you've heard that reference before, that's what that is originally from, the whole one of us, one of us. And so they start passing around this like chalice of wine and all the freaks are drinking it together. And then they offer it to Cleopatra, but she gets pretty angry about this and she just splashes it all over them and calls them freaks. She does not want to be part of that. So the performers are pretty upset about that. But Hercules and Cleopatra tell all the other performers to get the fuck out. And then they start messing with Hans. She like picks him up and puts him on her shoulders like a baby. And the fucking Hercules guy starts running around with like a trumpet and playing it. So Hans is pretty upset. They're all back at the trailer a little while later. And both Hercules and Cleopatra are apologizing to him. But Hans is feeling pretty sick and pretty sick of her shit. Hans passes out and Cleopatra calls for a doctor, I guess, or somebody does, and they take him back to the trailer. However, all of the other carnival folk are watching and are very sure that Cleopatra is the one that poisoned him. In fact, they overhear the conversation, so they're going to get even. So Hans is still recovering, and it's probably been a day or so, maybe a few hours into the evening. I'm not sure. Time means nothing in this movie, but Cleopatra gives him some more poison via making it seem like it's his medicine, and as he takes it, he immediately spits it out into a handkerchief. Hans is giving her the impression that he still trusts her, and so shortly after, she leaves the trailer and is followed by a few of the performers. One of the performers sneaks into Hans' trailer, and they have a short conversation that confirms that Hans and the other performers are planning to get back at Cleopatra for the bullshit she's pulled and how he's fully aware that she's been poisoning him. The next night occurs and they are traveling. It's very stormy and Cleopatra is about to give him some more medicine. And during this, a few of the other performers are in the trailer with Hans and he confronts her and says, "Show me the bottle that you just poured from." So reluctantly, Cleopatra shows him and he just totally calls her on her shit. All of the other performers that are in the cabin with him start pulling out fucking switchblades, like 1930 pistols, and they're just ready to fuck her up. At the same time, one of the other performers had overheard the conversation between Cleopatra and Hercules. So Hercules went to that performer's trailer as it's moving and he breaks into it. But thankfully, another one of the performers saves her and the rest of the performers start fucking him up with switchblades and kill him. In the original cut, or one of the cuts, there's an alternate ending where they cut his balls off and then he becomes like a falsetto performer or something. That's just a little side trivia there. But as this is all happening, it causes the trailers to sort of go off the road. So Cleopatra uses this opportunity to try and escape. So she runs out into the rain, thunder and lightning, and all of the performers, the disabled ones, are chasing her on their hands and knees with knives and guns and stuff, and she is backed into a tree and screams. We then are brought to the present. Remember, we started the movie in the present, and then this is a flashback of a announcer guy for the circus explaining who this, quote, freak is in this little box in front of them. And it is revealed that the circus performers have brutally maimed Cleopatra. She's now known as the human duck. Her tongue has been removed, one of her eyes has been gouged out, the flesh of her hands have been melted and deformed to look like duck feet, her legs have been cut off, and what's left of her torso has been tarred and feathered. So, yeah, this is the part of the movie that fucked me up, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since I saw it. For a 1932 film, holy shit, what a cursed fucking sight. So years apparently have gone by and Hans is just chilling in his giant mansion with his butler. And a couple of the performers, the able-bodied ones, and Frida, his ex-fiancée, come to visit him. And it is revealed that all Hans wanted to do was just to get the bottle of poison from Cleopatra and not brutally mutilate her. And he blames himself for this, but unfortunately, it still happened. So Frida's like, listen, baby, I know you feel bad about that, but it wasn't your fault. Hey, I still love you, so at least we've got that. So they just sort of hug, and she says she still loves him, and then seems like they're probably going to get back together. So I guess that's a win for Frida. Part of me in my headcanon thinks that Frida told them to fuck her up that exponentially, and that's kind of my headcanon for it. She got revenge from Cleopatra for stealing her man, and of course she gets her man in the end. So that's the end of the film. Pretty short one, only 61 minutes. I fucking love this movie. It's so good. There's just so much to unpack about this movie and how historical it is. And in 1994, it was selected for preservation by the United States National Film Registry, which is their whole thing is to preserve films that are culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. So if you haven't seen this movie, I still recommend go seeing it because there's just so many details that I couldn't really fully capture, even just telling you this secondhand. And while it is pretty disturbing and that ending is fucked up, for 61 minutes, I think you could probably stomach it. You might be disturbed for a week or two like me, but it's not super gory or graphic or anything. I mean, it's 1932, but I highly recommend checking this film out if you think you can. But we're now at the end of the podcast, so thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If you want to support the podcast, check out our Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, just sharing with your friends or tagging or posting on your stories about the podcast does a ton for me. Spreading by word of mouth is the way that I'd like to go about this, and I really appreciate anyone who already has done so. I also have a Patreon if you want to support directly. This money helps with the production of the podcast, as well as a lot of the tools that I use to edit and record. We also have merchandise at tpublic.com. I use tpublic because their customer service is great, and they're the most size inclusive. So you can get any type of size shirt, big, small, whatever kind of body type you have. They've likely got something for you. With all that said, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Be kind to yourself, love yourself, and do not forget to stay spooky out there.